What war are you fighting? Once upon a time, in a far-off land, there lived a gracious, benevolent, all-powerful Father King. The castle home of the king was arrayed in the most precious trappings available: gold, silver, jewels, the finest appointments. With its spacious rooms, magnificent architecture and palatial integrity, it was almost more than one could comprehend or fully appreciate. The sprawling gardens, rivers of purest water, and finest orchards on vast landscapes that blanketed the magnificent terrain, unlimited resources farther than the eye could see, provided a totally fulfilled life of joy for its residents. This kingdom, aside from its splendor, had one quality that made it unique in comparison with all the kingdoms that surrounded it. Far more beautiful, far more valuable, actually priceless, was the ability to have true intimacy between the Father King and all those who chose to live in his kingdom home. This intimacy, the unashamed sharing of oneself, allowed the kingdom home to radiate with a beauty that left all other kingdoms in darkness by comparison. The king's heart wanted only what was best for those who lived in his home. They, in turn, served the king and each other with the same intimate heart that he had. Life in the home of the king was joy beyond measure, for people cared more for each other and their king than they did for themselves, because the heart of the king was firmly engrafted in each of them. Being of one heart, there was no reason or need to function in any other way. This allowed the king's love to continuously radiate to everyone. This way of life burst forth and was visible to all the kingdoms of darkness that surrounded the king's home. It was the greatest joy of the king's son to make this heart of his father available to anyone who desired one. Although he was the son of the richest king in the land and heir to the throne, he would dress himself in his well-worn servant's garb and move from town to town in each kingdom, sharing the need and wonder of receiving the king's heart while loving his people. He knew there could be no real life without his father's heart. No one could enter his father's home unless this unique heart was accepted and engrafted into his or her own life. The desire and love for those in need of the heart encouraged him onward. After all, he himself had his Father King's heart. They were one. He also knew that one day, without warning, the heart would no longer be available, and those without it would never be able to live in the kingdom home of his father. They would never share the intimacy that set this kingdom apart from every other kingdom. Without this new heart, the desire for intimacy was absent, and the father could not impart himself to them. Others, who simply didn't understand, were buying, selling, or giving away other hearts from other kingdoms that made them feel needed. But the Father King's heart was unique in that, once imparted, it created a desire for intimacy with him and him alone. As all who fully accepted that heart turned in one accord to the Father, his kingdom grew strong, for all desired only what the Father and Son knew to be best for everyone. These other counterfeit hearts would be tainted, containing pieces that appeared to come from the Father King's heart, but actually did not. In their kingdoms, good deeds, moral restraint, folklore, and religious traditions were evident. As the people were caught up in these pursuits, they had no desire for intimacy with the Father King, nor any desire to live in his kingdom home or follow his ways. Oh, how important it was to receive the heart of the Father King and no other. As the inconspicuous servant son travelled from kingdom to kingdom, telling of his father's home and the need for a new heart as a requisite to living there and partaking of its everlasting love, some joyously received the new heart. Having tired of other hearts from other kingdoms, they could easily see the value of this one. They fully received it, allowed it to change them, and even shared the servant son's good news with those around them. Some felt no need for a new heart, or a need to live in a better place, if that place really even existed. Others laughed at the foolishness of the son, very willing to stay in the dark kingdoms. Still others tried to stop the servant son from telling others about the new heart. They understood that accepting the heart of the Father King from the Son meant one less customer for the seller of the counterfeit heart. The majority of the residents of all of the surrounding kingdoms, however, saw great value in only selected parts of the Father's heart. Feeling that a totally new heart was unnecessary, they modified the Father King's heart to suit their own understanding. Most removed the part that required intimacy, for it took too much time away from the things that seemed much more important. That modified heart still looked very much like the Father's, but the light of the Father's life could not radiate from it because he was not an integral part of it. The people with the modified hearts would visit the Father King's home and enjoy the visit very much, but they never got close enough to the Father to make it a permanent stay. In many cases they looked and acted very much like the residents of the Father's home, but it was only a cover for deeply disturbing selfish interests that were hidden inside of their lives. Some even came back to the servant son and other residents of the surrounding kingdoms to convince them that their modified hearts were as good or even better than the Father King's heart. They insisted that their hearts made the kingdoms of darkness that pervaded the other kingdoms a brighter and better place to live. Oh, how they sacrificed much for the Father King's home, or so they said. And they pointed out how they even made those who accepted other hearts from other kingdoms do the Father's will because of their sacrificial efforts. The majority of residents of most of the surrounding kingdoms embraced these modified hearts, believing that they were as good and powerful as the Father King's heart. This grieved both the Father and the Son. Wonderful times were available to those who lived in the Father King's home because he was personally available to his people. As they spent time with him, he would reveal the wonders of his kingdom home in greater and greater detail and the plans that he had for all of the residents. He always imparted himself to those who desired this intimacy. Each encounter revealed who the Father really was and the plans and reasons behind all he did. Hearts joined in intimacy with the Father exploded with love. There was no room for fear or self or need in the hearts of those enjoined to the Father King. All was in order at the home of the Father King, which was a great contrast to the homes of the other kingdoms. The modified heart kingdoms and their residents could not understand why there was so much peace and brightness there, and why the Father King would not help clean out all of their kingdoms. Some even cursed those who lived with and for the Father King. Those in other kingdoms always wondered how those in the Father's kingdom would not help them with all of the needs when so much darkness surrounded them. The modified heart could not see that the darkness could not be changed. It would always be there. It could only be given a new heart from the Son to make it bright, and it had long ago rejected that as its only option. There came time for the banquet honouring the servant son. It came to pass that a great banquet was being prepared in the Father King's home to honour his servant son. In anticipation of this glorious event, all the residents of the land ceased from any activity that interfered with their preparations. Each examined his banquet garment to make sure it had no spots or wrinkles or anything that was not bright, for no form of darkness would be allowed at this event. Much joy was evident as preparations were made. The whole kingdom began to ring with a wondrous sound as intimacy with the Father King increased, knowing of the upcoming wondrous event. This harmony brought strength and power to the Father King's land, which could be felt in all the surrounding kingdoms. Those who were steadfast in their belief that their modified heart was as good as the Father King's heart were disgusted at the sound of the preparations because there was so much other work to be done in their kingdoms. Their distaste for the Father King grew deeper and deeper as the joyous sound of the preparations got louder and clearer. Increasing numbers of the residents of the kingdoms of darkness heard the sound and accepted the Father King's heart, so that they could live in his land and help with the preparations. Others, however, hated the sound and did all they could to block it from their hearing and from the hearing of others. A great effort was put forth in the kingdoms of darkness to cover the sound with a noise of their own. This created much strife in these kingdoms, as the battles needed to change the land, which were being fought by the modified hearts, increased with intensity. With more and more warriors from these kingdoms accepting the Father's pure heart and leaving the battle lines to live in intimacy with the Father King in his kingdom home, less and less progress was being made to bring brightness to these kingdoms, even though the efforts increased. Weariness, fatigue and frustration were the daily fare of the modified hearts. Violent anger would manifest itself toward the servant son who was busy giving the Father's heart away, seemingly oblivious to all of their battles. The leaders of the modified hearts agreed that something had to be done. We must present our needs to the Father King. The few battles that we win are more than nullified by new battlefronts, and we need more people to help us fight. It was decided that the modified heart leaders of all the battles in the surrounding kingdoms would join together to seek an audience with the Father King to tell him of their dire circumstances. He surely would side with their causes and help them, for they were right and just. The day arrived when all the leaders of the surrounding kingdoms met to begin their pilgrimage to the land of the Father King to share their woe. They travelled for many days and overcame many perils to get to the home of the Father King. Weary and battle-worn, the peace and serenity that overwhelmed them as they entered the land of wonder when they arrived only kindled their anger. As they travelled toward the residence of the Father King, the stark contrast between the preparations for the banquet honouring the servant son and their own battle preparations only served to intensify their disdain. Their minds seethed with the thought of the many warriors they had lost to this seemingly unnecessary effort. Did the Father King not care at all? Didn't he see the need to help them? By the time they reached the castle home of the Father King, the leaders were convinced that their missions were a necessity. Their causes were just, and their anger was righteous. They were ready for an all-out war, if necessary, to win their right to be helped in their plight. The splendour, majesty and peace of the Father King's home and the radiance of the Father King himself did not dampen the zeal of the leaders of the surrounding kingdoms. They had come to plead their causes and were determined to stay as long as it took to achieve their goals. "Unfair!" the modified heart leader from the kingdom of perversion declared. "I have a heart that sees what is wrong, but you won't help me fight the battles. The kingdom of perversion grows darker no matter how hard or how often we fight." "That's right," chimed in the modified heart leader from the kingdom of murder. "No matter how convincingly we show them how wrong it is to murder, they still kill. In fact, as it grows darker, they even believe that we are the ones who do that which is wrong, and they have determined to kill every one of us." "The same thing is happening where I live," declared the modified heart leader from the kingdom of covetousness. "All of our properties and rights are being taken away. No matter how hard we fight, they just change the rules to suit their own needs. They don't care if things are fair or honest anymore. They're only concerned with rules that allow them to function unhindered. We lose more of our rights the more we fight." "The same with us," added the leader of the kingdom of woundedness. "We've asked you for help to get close enough to our enemies to be able to reason with them. But when we try, they only hurt us more." Each leader was impassioned in expressing his battlefront to the Father King, who listened attentively. Finally, after each leader had his say, the modified heart leader of the battle in the kingdom of religious fervour asked, "Why would you direct us to fight these battles and then not provide the means for us to win? In fact, you even took most of our warriors away with the announcement and sounds of the preparation for the banquet for your servant son, and he doesn't seem to care either. Why would you be so cruel as to leave us alone in the battles you have created?" With that, the Father King held up his hand for silence. A great hush fell over the assembly of the surrounding kingdom leaders with their modified hearts as the Father King rose to speak. The Father King began, "I have great sorrow for all of you and all of your concerns. However, I have allowed the kingdoms of darkness to exist for many years to be a catalyst so that you can make proper choices. It has grieved my son and me to see how many of you choose to live in darkness when all this is available to you." He gestured toward the vast expanse of his wondrous kingdom as he spoke. "Every opportunity to receive my heart has been presented to each resident of every kingdom. The choice has been yours as to where and how you wanted to live, either in pain and darkness forever, or with me in abundance and joy. I wish that none of you would choose darkness, but such is not the case, and it saddens me more than you could ever know." The compassion in his voice deepened as he stood to move closer to the modified heart leaders. "But," the Father King stated, "it must be so. Freedom to choose must be extended to each resident. It is then that I know who truly desires to be with me and be a part of future works and future kingdoms I will build, or who desires to do everything independent of my will and pay the consequences. The simplicity of accepting my pure heart is the means I have chosen so that all residents, regardless of their past, would have access to the joy of my kingdom home. No one can ever say that he or she could not achieve the right to live with me, for citizenship in my kingdom is freely given and available simply by asking for the new heart from my servant son." The modified heart leaders became restless because it seemed that the Father King was avoiding their petitions. They knew battles were raging in their home kingdoms even as they were listening. Accustomed as they were to warfare, they had difficulty quieting themselves to hear the Father King. "What about us?" cried a voice from the rear of the assembly. "What about our needs? While all of the turmoil is going on, our homes are threatened, our freedoms are being destroyed, and the darkness gets worse. What are you going to do about that?" "I have already done all that I am going to do," the Father King said to the astonishment of everyone present. "My plans have been laid out for everyone to see from the beginning, and all is proceeding according to schedule. It is in proper order," he said calmly. Then, raising his hand again to quell the rising tide of hostility that sprang up among the wide-eyed leaders, he continued, "You have come here today to tell me of my need to help you in your quest to change the kingdoms in which you live. I would like to ask you these two questions. Who has asked you to fight the battles in which you have engaged? And from whom have you received your orders and battle plans?" "Why, you did," came the unanimous response. "You showed us the difference between right and wrong, and we have spent our lives showing others what we know and what they need to do. We have worked only for you, to bring your desires to those in our kingdom homes. Our only purpose was to please you, for we know how much it grieved you to see the darkness. Our only intent was to make our fellow residents see the light of your kingdom home, and to try to make their darkness light too." "Friends," the Father King exclaimed as he walked among the assembly and placed his hand on their shoulders to calm them, "please listen carefully. I've appreciated your zeal and desire to please me. I have noticed your efforts with great concern, but you have been mistaken as to my ultimate purpose for what you see happening. My purpose for you has never been to change the kingdoms in which you now live. My purpose has been for you and those who you reach with my heart to come out of them and live here with me, for they are destined to grow darker and are doomed to failure. Nothing can live apart from the light of my pure heart. You've seen that anyone who receives my pure heart leaves the battle to live with me and then returns only to assist my servant son in giving away more of my pure heart. You've seen my son himself focus only on those who would receive my heart from him. Others he allows to go their own way. Don't you see that as my pure heart is received, the accompanying desire for intimacy with me eliminates all strife and fears and empowers you to discern the wonder and joy of doing things my way? As I share my plans and desires with those who come to me, they see that there is no more need to engage in the kind of battles determined by the kingdom of darkness. Our warfare is different. I only ask my people to bring others to me so that they too can receive all of me and understand their part in my plans. When all is in order and the timing is perfect, nothing will hinder my brightness from overcoming all of the darkness that seems so strong to all of you and your kingdom residents. Those who choose to live in the darkness will perish. My only desire for you is to accept my heart. I would rather have all of you with me than have you win all of your battles for me. The most important gift you can give me is yourself. I desire to be with you above all else. Out of the intimacy we share, you will desire to tell others about my heart, and they too will share my love. The rest is already planned, and I will accomplish it very soon. Have no fear, for I choose to protect those who accept my heart from any eternal harm or strife." Then the Father King paused and looked at those assembled with eyes that held a love they had never seen before. He stepped closer, and with words that were given as gifts to be unwrapped by each of them, he said, "Don't you see? If you give yourself completely to me, I take you as my own, and as you come to me in intimacy, I impart myself to you, and we become one." His voice grew quiet and impassioned with love. Almost whispering, he continued, "All battles are already won through my servant Son and his ways, which are my ways. All I want is all of you, for I love you." A great calm came over the assembly as the Father continued to reveal more of himself to those gathered there. He walked close to the crowd, touching some of them as he spoke. Many times, as he had a specific word of encouragement for certain individuals, he would take their hands or hold their shoulders and look them directly in the eyes as he spoke intimately to them. As the wealth and wisdom of the Father King's heart and his plans for those who chose it were unveiled, antiquated weapons were quietly laid on the floor throughout the great room. Tears of repentance flowed freely from the battle-hardened warriors. Now that they were experiencing the Father's love firsthand, an urgency to tell of that love, available only by accepting a true heart, replaced anger and hatred in their hearts, even toward the enemies of the Father King. Worn, bloody battle raiment was exchanged for clean white garments of submission and praise, in honor of the Father King. The wisdom of accepting the pure heart of the Father King overshadowed all other desires of all the leaders, as one by one they received the pure heart and all that it contained. The thoughts of distant battles seemed like forgotten memories as the Father King's wisdom and love unfolded before the eyes of the awestruck assembly. Clenched fists of fury became open hands of service to the Father King. Striving zeal gave way to peace and freedom, as the desire for intimacy replaced the cold urgency of warfare. A knowledge of the true mission of bringing residents out of the kingdoms of darkness, rather than changing those kingdoms, soon became the only mission of the gathered warriors. All those who came to see the Father King that day came to a place of rest, knowing that the battle was already won by him, and that their battlefronts were only distractions that obscured the Father King's true purpose. It was time to go home. The return trip home was filled with much wonder for the newly impassioned followers of the Father King. The sounds of preparation for the great banquet now brought overwhelming joy to the changed travellers as they peacefully journeyed toward their former homes. The bountiful landscapes of their new home welcomed them at every turn, increasing their desire to return as soon as they made the Father King's heart available to those who were left on the raging battlefronts. The now pure hearts were at peace as they returned to the kingdoms of darkness, which they knew were about to perish. The commitment of every heart included the realization that the same zeal with which they had fought against darkness would now be implemented for the brightness of the Father King and his servant Son. There was much rejoicing in the Father King's heart as he bid a temporary farewell to his new kingdom home residence. Soon afterward, the time for the great banquet arrived. A call was issued throughout the land to all who had received the Father King's heart. All was now ready for the Father King to reveal the wonder of all that was available to those seated at the banquet table. The weariness of preparation and the warfare that occurred during the distribution of the Father King's heart became only faded memories as his servants received their reward of eternal splendor. While the kingdoms of darkness spiraled to depths of decadence never observed before, the Father King presided in all of his glory, rejoicing at the joy of his servants as he unveiled his provision to those who chose to live with him. His greatest joy, however, was the presentation of his servant son, now the glorious King, to the pure-hearted. All power, honor, and majesty to destroy the kingdoms of darkness and reign throughout the Father King's land were given to the once inconspicuous servant son. The Father King rejoiced as the pure-hearted received his now radiant son with love. All was at peace and in order in the kingdom home of the Father King. Here are some questions you need to ask yourself. Do you desire intimacy with Father God as your priority in life? What kind of salvation message are you representing to those who are dying? How are you preparing for the banquet Father God is having soon? Have you unknowingly embraced pieces of other kingdoms? Enjoy the journey.